Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince and Other Writings. It has been quite insightful, I must say, and I have definitely learned a lot from it. And just to refresh your memory, we're in chapter 25, How Much Fortune Can Do in Human Affairs, and How She Is to Be Resisted. He's referring to fortune in the feminine. Okay, let's begin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. On this also depends the variation in what is considered good. For if one governs himself with caution and patience, and if the times and circumstances turn in such a way that his behavior is good, he will prosper. But if the times of circumstances change, he will be ruined, because he does not change his mode of proceeding. So, mode of proceeding, and then governing yourself with caution and patience. Nor can any man be found who is so prudent that he knows how to adapt himself to this, both because he cannot deviate from that to which his nature inclines him, and also because when he has always prospered by walking in one path, he cannot be persuaded to depart from it, and therefore the cautious man, when it is time to act impetuously, does not know how to do it, so that he is ruined. So to act impetuously, for if he changed his nature with the times and circumstances, fortune would not change. Pope Julius II acted impetuously in everything he did, and he found the times and circumstances so in conformity with that mode of proceeding of his that he always achieved a happy outcome. Consider the first campaign he made against Bologna while Messer Giovanni Bentivogli was still living. The Venetians were not pleased with it, nor was the King of Spain with France. He was in the midst of negotiations about the campaign, and nevertheless, because of his ferocity and impetuosity, he personally set the expedition in motion. This move caused both Spain and the Venetians to stop and hesitate, the latter because of fear, and the other because of the desire he had to regain the entire kingdom of Naples. And, on the other hand, Julius dragged the King of France along behind him, because, seeing the Pope make this move, and desiring to make him his ally in order to put down the Venetians, the king felt that he could not refuse the Pope troops without obviously harming him. So to put down the Venetians, so Julius is like, hey, King of France, I need some soldiers, so put them on up. You can see the militarism in the Pope, and I think it's funny when Christians try to pretend that they don't have a militaristic history. You know, it's quite funny. The king felt that he could not refuse the Pope troops without obviously harming him. Thus, with his impetuous move, Julius achieved that which no other pontiff would have achieved with the utmost human prudence, because if he had waited until the negotiations were concluded and everything was settled in order to depart from Rome, as any other pontiff would have done, he would have never succeeded, for the King of France would have had 1,000 excuses. So notice this. So Julius was like, and recall, he said, Pope Julius II, he's like, hey, I'm not going to sit here and wait for everything to be set in stone. I'm going to go on and head out of Rome. Because the King of France seems to just be delaying it by making up excuses not to hand over troops. So when he set out on his own initiative, he seems to have done a better job, it appears. And the others would have stirred up 1,000 fears. I wish to admit the Pope's other actions, which were all similar, and which all turned out well for him. The shortness of his life did not allow him to experience the contrary. For if times had come in which it was necessary to proceed with caution, his ruin would have resulted. for he would never have deviated from these methods to which his nature inclined him. I conclude, therefore, that since fortune changes and men remain set in their ways, they will prosper as long as the two are in accord with one another. So, the ability to see what the times demand is what I'm getting here. So time is of the essence, and you have to kind of see what's going to work right now on this moment. But that's a great balancing act. Knowing when to strike, when to hold, when to wait, when to proceed. But they will not prosper when the two are not in accord. So if you're being temperate, okay, I think let's get an example here. Daenerys Targaryen, when she was sailing to Westeros, she had 3 full dragons and a full unsullied army. And she should have struck King's Landing then. But Tyrion, trying to make her be patient and soft, pretty much ruined it. And then, when you look at how Tyrion was telling her, wait to, see if Cersei will bend, right? This was not really working because the longer you wait, the more Cersei would have time to get more troops. And then you saw Sansa, when they had won the war against the Night King, she was saying, the troops, they have to rest. Which is true, but Daenerys saw it as a delay of payment. So she's Sansa was acting a little bit like the King of France, if you think about it. Like, we need to wait, excuses, but when it's time to hold up their end, Sansa didn't want to really send the Stark military. And so, if she had to help the Night King, and then Jon shanked her for it. But then if you see how she acted too rash, and she burnt her allies, literally, then they turned against her, right? Tyrion was like, oh. But Tyrion was always playing the peacemaker, and you can think of that what you will, but she was the blood of the dragon. So if she would have struck when Yara Greyjoy, when she was like, let's strike King's Landing now, when they had Dorne, right? Cersei was smarter than Daenerys in her strategy, and Daenerys listened to her advisors, so Jorah Mormont and those others were dead, right? So she was stuck with Tyrion and Varys really is just not that trustworthy, but be a dragon, as the Lady of Thorns said, but the Queen of Thorns. So you can see so many examples in fiction and then in real history, and he just gave one in real history from his perspective. And so you have to kind of know when your fortune changes and what you have to do. Like, you have to know when to be like, okay, usually you can have this sort of patience, but then what? Think about how when Daenerys took over Meereen, she tried to establish a Westerosi laws in their area and was like, this guy should have a trial. And one of her followers, who was a devout follower, shanked somebody, and she had him beheaded for not obeying orders. And this kind of turned a lot of people against her. And so you can see how she's trying to be all just or whatever, and introducing something at a time where she could forgive somebody. It's interesting. So you have to know, it's like reading the room. It's really seeing the context of what's required here. That's what I get from it. Anyways, let me know what you think. I certainly think this, that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, for fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to keep her down, to beat her and knock her about. Damn. I mean, Niccolo, jeez. What is wrong? To keep her down. Damn! Misogyny, sexist, and chauvinist. And it is necessary if you wish to keep her down to beat her and knock her about. And Nicole put women. So Fortune is a woman. Were you with Niccolo Machiavelli in a relationship? You may be up for compensation. And one sees that she lets herself be conquered by men of this sort more than by those who proceed coldly. Ooh, that's a secret aspect of women. Notice what he just said here. The feminists will be ripping their hair out, biting at their ankles, rah, screaming. But it is quite true that women, we do have, like, men can be tortured and they break less than women. And so if you're just coldly, some women will respond to that, but others, no, it has to take a physical presence. It's really quite interesting. So that's a very interesting angle there. And therefore, like a woman, she is always the friend of the young, because they are less cautious, fiercer, and command her with more audacity. Ooh, more audacity. Command her with more audacity. This is interesting. I picked somebody who was older than me because they were more calmer and more mature. But I could see his point where, however, when I met him, he was 29. Now he's in his 40s. So he was actually, yeah. I can see what he's saying. Like, if you pick a young man to marry and, you know, they have more of that youthfulness, spunk, that sort of youthful testosterone that's less bridled. Very interesting. Okay, now there's some notes here. Julius II attacked Perugia and Bologna in 1506, conquering the first city on September 13th and the second on November 11th. Giovanni Bentivogli, 1438 to 1508, ruled Bologna from 1462 until Julius drove him out in 1506. He died 2 years later in exile. They used to just exile people. Ferdinand II of Aragon had ceded several ports in Puglia to the Venetians in 1494. He regained them in 1508. Chapter 26, an exhortation to seize Italy and liberate her from the barbarians. Bismillah. Having considered, therefore, all the things discussed above, and meditating on whether in Italy at present the times were ripe to honor a new prince, and if there were material which might give a prudent and capable virtuoso man, so prudent, capable virtuoso man, an opportunity to introduce a form into her that would confer honor on himself and be good for all her people. I think that so many things are coming together to benefit a new prince that I do not know what time was ever more suitable for him. And if, as I said, it was necessary, in order to see the ability virtue of Moses, that the people of Israel should be slaves in Egypt, and to be recognized the greatness of spirit of Cyrus, that the Persians should be oppressed by the Medes, and to recognize the excellence of Theseus, that the Athenians should be dispersed. So, at present, in order to recognize the ability, virtue of an Italian spirit, it has been necessary that Italy should be reduced to its present condition, and that she should be more enslaved than the Hebrews, more servile than the Persians, and more dispersed than the Athenians, without a head, without order, beaten, despoiled, torn apart, overrun, and having endured every sort of disaster. This is a very interesting thing what he just said. So, necessary that Italy be reduced. So notice this. Okay, let's really examine some of these points here. Without a head. So, when you take out the authority, the guiding compass, sometimes people disperse. They don't know what to do. There's a vacuum, someone steps in and diverts the movement to another way. People gather to the head, and then the head decides, and like, okay, we're going this way. Without order. So, if you have people in this anarchical state, you're over here, someone's over there, they're disagreeing, they're not obeying, you can't be like, hey, you can't organize people. It just can't be done. If you look at a machine, it has an order. These factories, there's an order. The cooking line of a restaurant has an order. Things to be done and carried out in a process and methodology that has been approved to be sufficient and productive, right? So if you don't have a head and there's no order, nothing's going to get done. You can't really lead and be a sort of well-taken people. Beaten, so you're sore. Physically and spiritually, you're beaten, you're subdued. Alright? You have to recover from that mentally, financially, and spiritually. So if you apply a nation that has been beaten down, there's no head, there's no order, now you're really going to have some trouble. Despoiled. So things have been absolutely ruined. And they have to be rebuilt, which takes order and head. Because in order to rebuild, you have to have somebody really have a blueprint for that. Torn apart. So you're dispersed, you're dismembered. The units are not operative. They're not functioning in a cohesive manner. Overrun. So you're basically lost. Think of like when a zombie horde breaks into a camp and they have flooded it and they're just too many to deal with. Think about that. And having endured every sort of disaster. Think about a situation where there's no leadership, there's no order, people, everything's ruined, you're overrun, you're beaten. Well, what are you going to do? You know, that's going to take a lot to rebuild. And although before now a glimmer of light may have shown itself in someone so that it was possible to think that he was ordained by God for her redemption, nevertheless it has been seen since then how, at the height of his career, he was cast down by fortune. Thus, left almost lifeless, she is waiting for the one who can heal her wounds and put a stop to the plundering of Lombardy. Plundering of Lombardy? To the rapacious taxation of the kingdom of Naples and Tuscany. So notice this. Rapacious taxation. And cure her of those wounds which have been long festering. Behold how she prays to God to send someone to redeem her from these barbarous cruelties and insolence. Behold as well how she is ready and willing to follow any banner. So notice this. Ready and willing to follow any banner. So, if your nation is so divided, so broken, there's a want and demand for leadership that's like ripe for the taking, ripe for the plucking. Provided that there is someone to pick it up, nor is there anyone in sight and presence, and whom she can place more hope than in your illustrious house, which with its fortune and ability virtue, favored by God and the church of which is now the prince, could make itself head of this redemption. This will not be very difficult for you if you call up before you the actions and lives of those men named above. And although those men were rare and marvelous, nonetheless they were men, and each of them had less of an opportunity than the present one, and each of them had less, for their enterprise was not more just than this one, nor easier, nor was God more friend to them than you, and the justice here is great. that war is just for those people for whom it is necessary, and those arms are pious where there is no hope except in arms. Oh, wow. Okay, let's see that again. That war is just for those people for whom it is necessary, and those arms are pious where there is no hope except in arms. So, if you have, you've tried other means to liberate yourself, now the only thing left is to fight, then it almost feels like a sort of holy war. That you tried to negotiate your way out, you tried to do this, you tried to do that. Well, now the only hope is in a violent revolution. That's what it sounds like. Because in arms, so arms, weapons. Not using arms to have a tea party. And then wars for that as whom is necessary. That's an interesting line. Here, there is the greatest willingness, nor can there be great difficulty, where there is great willingness. What? Here there is the greatest willingness, nor can there be great difficulty, where there is great willingness, provided that your house adopts the arrangements made by those whom I have proposed for you as a model. Besides this, extraordinary things have been seen here, brought about by God. The sea has been opened, a cloud has shown you the road, the rock has poured out water here, it has rained manna, everything has come together for your greatness. The remainder you must do yourself. God does not wish to do everything in order not to deprive us of our free will and of the portion of the glory that belongs to us. That's a very unique angle there. God does not wish to do everything for us because he doesn't want to deprive us of our free will and our glory. So, free will and glory. So let's write that on the side. Glory, free will. God is not going to do everything for us. And it is no marvel that none of the Italians mentioned before have been able to do that which is hoped your illustrious house may do. And if in so many revolutions in Italy and so many military campaigns, it always seems that military ability virtue is extinguished in her, this has happened because her ancient institutions were not good, and there has been no one who knew how to find out new ones. And nothing confers so much honor on a new man on the rise as do the new laws and the new institutions that he has discovered. So, new institutions that he has discovered, conferring honor. Let's write this over here. Conferring honor. How do you get honor? New laws, new institutions. Let's write that down. New laws, new institutions. So if you think about politicians today, if they have something that is remarkable, something different than their predecessors that helps the people, they'll then be remembered for that in history, ideally. If they're a tyrant, ineffectual, feckless, filled with dementia, eating pudding, like Joe Biden, they're not really going to be known for that, and they're not going to really have that legacy. But if you're new to the arena of politics, putting forth laws and institutions that are going to help the virtue of the nation, also and military ability virtue, well, that's going to help you get yourself put on the map. These things, when they have good foundations and have greatness in them, make him revered. So notice here, good foundations and have greatness in them. Make him revered and marveled at. And in Italy there is no lack of matter into which kind of form can be introduced. Here there is great ability, virtue in the members, were it not for lack of it in her heads, in duels and in combats involving just a few men. Look at how superior the Italians are in strength, in dexterity, in ingenuity, but when it comes to armies, those things are not to be seen, and all of this derives from the weakness of their heads. For those who have the know-how are not obeyed. So notice this. For those who have the know-how are not obeyed. You think about your duty as a subject to your ruler. You may not understand their stratagem, and if you go about rebelling and causing issues, you may be ruining the plot. And with everything thinking, and everyone thinking that he knows how, there has not been anyone up to now, though, who, through his ability, virtue, and fortune, has been able to make the others yield precedence to him. So, obeying, yielding, makes me think about how we're supposed to obey the rulers, those hadiths about, not causing trouble in the land. And, what you as a Muslim owe the Khalifa, right? What rights they have. Very interesting. Hence, it has come about that in so much time and so many wars waged during the last 20 years, whenever there has been an entirely Italian army, it has always made a bad showing. The first witness to this is Taro, then Alessandria, Capua, Genoa, Vaila, Bologna, Mestre. If your illustrious house, therefore, wishes to follow those excellent men who redeemed their native lands, it is necessary, before all else, as true foundation of every undertaking, to provide yourself with your own citizen army. So, to provide yourself your own citizen army, so own citizen army. If you recall, he explained the dangers of mercenaries and whatnot, and then the danger of allying with somebody who has way more forces than you. There was a lot of great things he said, so go back in the older videos and check that out. For you cannot have more loyal or truer or better soldiers. So for him, a citizen army will provide you with better soldiers and more loyalty. They're tied to the land. Okay, so loyalty. And then truer citizens. Yes. And although each one of them may be good, altogether they will become better because they see themselves commanded by their prince and honored and provided for by him. It is necessary, therefore, to prepare oneself with such arms in order to be able to defend oneself from foreigners with Italian prowess, virtue. And although the Swiss and Spanish infantry are deemed terrifying, nonetheless in both there is a defect, so that a third kind of force could not only oppose them, but be confident of overcoming them. The Spaniards cannot withstand cavalry, and the Swiss have to fear the infantry they encounter in combat, who are as resolute as they are. Resolute. To be resolute. Whence it has been seen, and experience will show, that the Spaniards cannot withstand the French cavalry, and the Swiss can be defeated by Spanish infantry, and although we have not had a complete experience of the latter, still we have had a hint of it in the Battle of Ravenna. When the Spanish infantry confronted the German battalions, who make use of the same formation of the Swiss. There the Spanish, using their bodily agility and aided by their bucklers, entered between and under the German pikes. Ooh. We gotta look that up, what it looks like. German pikes. In a safe position to attack them without the Germans being able to find a remedy for it. And if it had not been for the cavalry that charged them, the Spaniards would have annihilated them. Knowing, therefore, the defects of both of these kinds of infantry, a new kind can be organized that will resist the cavalry and have no fear of foot soldiers. So here you can see the pros and cons. Pros, cons. So, seeing defects. Now, he just mentioned previously that new laws, new institutions, and this will help you get marveled at. So, pointing out how the military stratagems can help you become more well-versed and also bring glory to yourself and to your nation. This will depend on the kind of arms being used and on the change in the system. And these are among the things which, when newly instituted, give reputation and greatness to a new prince. Yeah, exactly. This opportunity must not, therefore, be allowed to pass so that Italy, after so much time, may see her liberator. I cannot express with what love he would be received in all those provinces which have suffered because of these foreign inundations. If you're wondering what that noise is, it's I give pine cones to the birds and they like chewing on them. It's good for them. With what thirst for vengeance, with what steadfast loyalty, with what piety, with what tears, what doors would be closed against him, what people would refuse him obedience, what envy would oppose him, what Italian would refuse him homage. To everyone this barbarian domination stinks. May your illustrious house therefore take up the task with that courage and that hope with which just enterprises are taken up, so that under its banner this country may be ennobled, and under its auspices that which Petrarch said may prove true. Quote, Virtue contro a fiore prenderà le arme e fiel combatter corto, che l'antico valore nelle italici cor non è ancor morto. So it means valor against furor will take up arms and the combat will be short. Oh. For ancient valor in the Italian hearts is not yet dead. So this is an excerpt from Petrarch's Canzone. We're gonna look that up. That sounds awesome. Okay. So, a country being ennobled. So notice the things he said here. Liberator. Okay. Foreign indentations. Steadfast loyalty. If you have, he's contending here, you know, you want to be a man to make a name for yourself. You need to do things that are ingenious. There's ingenuity. You have to make a mark by doing something revolutionary. And if you are seen by the people to possess the capacity and the virtue of being able to lead in a new way that will usurp your enemies and conquer and dominate your enemies, then there will not be an envy that will oppose you. Many will give you homage, and you will be seen as illustrious. Mashallah. Now we're in the life of Castruccio Castracani of Lucca. For those who think about it, my dearest Zenobi and Luigi, it seems a marvelous fact that all or the majority of those who have accomplished truly great things in this world and have been outstanding among men of their age have had low and obscure origins and births. So that's an interesting angle. So if you've done great things, those who have done great things are of lowly birth, humbly obscure origins. They go to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was an orphan, or have been afflicted by fortune beyond all measure. For either all of them have been exposed to wild beasts, or have had fathers so base that, ashamed of them, they made themselves into the sons of Jove, or of some other god. That's interesting, having base fathers. Base and lowly fathers. Now, this is not the slang way of based. No, like base as in low, lowly, not of notable distinction. Since many of them are known to everyone, it would be tiresome and hardly acceptable to the reader to repeat who they were. Therefore I omit them as superfluous. I certainly believe that this derives from the fact that Fortune, wishing to demonstrate to the world that she, and not Prudence, is the one who makes men great, starts showing her power at a time when Prudence cannot have any part in the matter. So, when Prudence takes place, time and context of the application of prudence. But rather, everything has to be acknowledged as coming from her. Castruccio Castracani of Lucca was then one of those who, considering the times in which he lived and the city in which he was born, did very great things. And, like the others, did not have a happier or more renowned birth, as will be seen in the narration of this course of his life. Since I feel I have found many things in his life that are most exemplary concerning both ability, virtue, and fortune. So, ability, virtue, and fortune. I thought I would recall it to the memory of men, and I decided to address it to you, as to those who, more than other men whom I know, delight in noble virtuosi deeds. I say then that the Castracani family is numbered among the noble families of the city of Lucca, although in these times, in keeping with the law of all earthly things, it has disappeared. Into it was born one Antonio, who, after becoming a priest, served as the canon of St. Michael's of Lucca, and, as a sign of honor, was called Messer Antonio. He had no family other than a sister, whom he married to Bonaccorso Cenami. But after Bonaccorso died, and she was left a widow, she returned to stay with her brother, with the intention of never marrying again. Oh, wow. She must have really loved that guy. Behind the house in which he lived, Messer Antonio had a vineyard, which one could enter from many directions and without much difficulty, since it was bordered by a number of vegetable gardens. It happened one morning, a little after sunrise, when Madonna Dianora, for that was the name of Messer Antonio's sister, was walking through the vineyard, picking, as is the custom of women, certain herbs in order to make certain seasonings of hers, that she heard a rustling among the foliage under a vine, and turning her eyes toward it, she heard a sound like weeping. Moving toward it, she discovered the hands and face of a baby boy who, wrapped up in the leaves, seemed to ask her for help. Oh. As a result, partly amazed, partly frightened, full of compassion and wonder, she picked him up, and having carried him home and washed him and wrapped him up in a white swaddling bands, according to the custom, she presented him to Messer Antonio upon his return home. Hearing what had happened and seeing the boy, he was no less filled with wonder and pity than was the woman. And after considering between themselves what course of action they ought to take, they decided to raise him, since he was a priest and she did not have children. Subhanallah. Foliage under a vine. So they're in the vineyard. Wow. Oh, it's like a little bit of like how Moses was in the Nile and went to Pharaoh's wife. Someone takes this mercy. Oh, it's so kind when women are so sweet to the children. Having taken a nurse into the house, then, they took care of him with the same love as if he was their own son. And, having him baptized, they gave him the name Castruccio in memory of their father. Castruccio's grace grew with the years, and in everything he showed intelligence and prudence. And, depending on his age, he quickly learned those things to which he was directed by Messer Antonio. Intending to make him a priest and eventually to relinquish his canonry and other benefices to him, Antonio taught him accordingly. But he had come upon a subject totally opposed to the priestly temper, for as soon as Castruccio reached the age of 14 and began to feel a bit of courage in confronting Messer Antonio, and not to fear Madonna Dianora at all, he laid ecclesiastical books aside and began to practice with arms. Ooh, interesting. So, they're trying to raise him in theology, like, hey, you know, we're going to make you a priest or whatever, but he's getting more attracted to that masculine urge of combat, you know. Nor did he take delight in anything other than in handing lem, or in running, jumping, wrestling, and similar sports with others who were his peers, in which he showed the greatest ability, virtue of mind and body, and far surpassed all others of his age. And if he sometimes did read, no reading pleased him other than that which spoke of war, or of things done by the greatest men. Because of this, Messer Antonio suffered inestimable sorrow. This is destiny, you know? It's like, if that's the way the young lad wants to be, then that's the way he gets to be. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. There was in the city of Lucca a gentleman of the Guinigi family, named Messer Francesco, who in riches and grace and strength, virtue, far exceeding all the other Lucchesi, his profession was war. And he had long fought under the Visconti of Milan, and since he was a Ghibellene, he was esteemed above all others who belonged to that party in Lucca, since he was then in Lucca, and met every morning and evening with the other citizens under the Loggia of the Podesta, which is at the head of the Piazza di San Michele, the main square of Lucca. He often saw Castruccio with the other boys of the neighboring engaging in those exercises which I spoke of above, and it seemed to Messer Francesco that, in addition to surpassing them, Castruccio had a kingly authority over them, and that they, in a certain way, loved and revered him. He became very eager to know who he was. So, kingly authority. Showing signs of leadership. And so, loved and revered. Like, they made him, okay, this is going to sound cliche, but they made him the alpha. Being informed about him by the bystanders, Messer Francesco was inflamed with even greater desire to have him in his service, And one day, having summoned the boy, he asked him where he would rather be, in the house of a gentleman who would teach him to ride and handle arms, or in the house of a priest, where he would never hear anything other than holy offices and masses. Interesting. You get to see, like, their destiny. Where do you belong? You know, some people are just born into that. Messer Francesco noticed how happy Castruccio became when he heard horses and arms mentioned, but how he remained reticent, slightly embarrassed, until he was encouraged by Messer Francesco to speak, when he replied that if his guardian was agreeable, nothing would give him greater pleasure than to leave priestly studies behind and to take up those of a soldier. Subhanallah. Yes, well, some men are destined to be theologians, and others are destined to be warriors. The reply pleased Messer Francesco greatly, and in a very few days he arranged things so that Messer Antonio gave Castruccio to him. He was impelled to do this more by the boy's nature than anything else, since he judged that he could not keep him for long as he was. Once Castruccio had passed thus from the house of Messer Antonio Castracani, the canon, into the house of Messer Francesco Guinghi di Condottiere. It is extraordinary to think in how very little time he had to master all those skills, virtue, and reflexes that are required in a true gentleman. First of all, he became an excellent rider. Managing all the wildest horses with the greatest dexterity. And in jousts and tournaments, although quite young, he was worthier of notice than anyone else. For in every feat, whether involving strength or dexterity, no man was found to surpass him. To this were added his manners, in which he was seen in incredible modesty. So, manners, modesty, mashallah, tabarakallah. For he was never seen to do a deed or heard to speak a word that was displeasing, and he was respectful to his elders. So, respectful. So, elders. Modest with his equals and pleasant to his inferiors. Pleasant to his inferiors. Pleasant to his inferiors. True gentlemen, not calling them losers or brokies. These things that made him loved not only by the entire Guinigi family, but by the entire city of Lucca. It happened in those times when Castruccio had already reached the age of 18 that the Ghibellines were driven out of Pavia by the Guelphs, and Messer Francesco Guinigi was sent by the Visconti of Milan to their aid. With him went Castruccio, who was in charge of his whole company. In this expedition, Castruccio showed so many signs of his prudence and courage that no one who took part in that campaign acquired such prestige with everyone as he did, and his name became great and honored, not merely in Pavia, but in all of Lombardy. After he returned to Lucca with much more prestige than he had himself at his departure, Castruccio did not fail to make friends for himself as much as it was possible for him to do so, employing all the methods that are necessary to win men over. But Messer Francesco Guinigi dying and leaving behind his 13-year-old son, named Pagolo, made Castruccio the tutor and guardian of his property, having sent for him before he died and begged him to agree to bring up his son with the same devotion with which Castruccio himself had been brought up, and to pay the son those debts of gratitude which he had been unable to pay the father. Look at that. So he wanted him to take a part in his, like, the ruling of his son. So Pagolo, he has a son named Pagolo. Someone really gotta like you. Think about it. That's a noble character. Not only did he tutor him in arms, but it gives him a very personal duty. It's like true brotherhood. Messer Francesco thus having died, Castruccio served as the guardian and tutor of Parolo, and grew so much in reputation and power that the favor he was accustomed to enjoying in Lucca changed into envy, so much so that many slandered him as suspicious man who had the heart of a tyrant. Among these the chief was Messer Giorgio degli Opizi, head of the Guelph party. Since he was hoping after the death of Messer Francesco to become Prince of Lucca, he felt that Castruccio, who had retained control through the favor of his meritorious qualities obtained for him, had taken away his opportunity, and for this reason he went about spreading rumors to deprive Castruccio of favor. Ooh, so envy. Wow. Guelph party, Messer Giorgio degli Opizi. Look at that envious little twat. The evil eye may not protect us. The latter first felt anger at this, to which apprehension was soon added, since he thought that Messer Giorgio would never rest until he had brought him into disfavor with the vicar of King Robert of Naples, who would have him chased out of Lucca. So, subhanallah, he's really nervous then. So, he's in Lucca. The vicar King Robert of Naples. So, Robert of Naples. The villain. The Guelph party. Okay, we will pause here, because we're almost at an hour. So if you look at this, you can see just how much is going on in how men become men, how men prove themselves, the methodology for men. And I like this story because I hadn't heard of Castruccio before. But to think a little helpless babe abandoned by its parents in this little vineyard by foliage under a vine, and she's out there and she takes this great pity, and you know, they were childless. It's so sweet. I mean, subhanallah. But it was his, hold on, that's the sister. She don't have a kid, he don't have a kid. Donna Dianora. Oh. And from a young age, you know, you could just see, like, he's got something special about him, you know? Amazing. And then recall the other things about prudence, you know, what we were here, and how you can make your country ennobled, how you can protect your country against foreign invasions, how you can become more steadfast and have steadfast, loyal supporters. And then that poetic line from Petrarch's Canzone, maybe we can find an English translation of that. The Battle of Ravenna, talking about Spanish infantry confronting the German battalions. And then there was the mention of the Swiss. And then there was something called spiked bucklers, and then pikes, different types of cavalry, and how you can resist different types of cavalry, and infantry, the foot soldiers. And he contended that if what confers a lot of honor on a person is when they do new laws and new institutions that are upon good foundations and have greatness in them, that will then make you revered and marveled at. Since he mentioned this and then is mentioning the Castrucci, I think we're going to see an angle of that as well. And then he mentioned that war is just for the people for whom it is necessary, and that those arms are pious where there is no hope except in arms. And so if you think about, you know, the American Revolution, you can think of tons of stuff, I think, throughout the past where you can see his point in what he's making. He also talked about how if you have the know-how but your subjects are not obeying and they don't yield precedence to you, this is going to cause a problem. He also mentioned that a prince should provide himself with his own citizen army, because they'll be more loyal and truer, and they'll make better soldiers. You know, having a tie to the land. It's really interesting. Okay. The whole thing about prudence and being a virtuoso capable was mentioned. He talked about what it would be like for Italy to have no head and without order, beaten, despoiled. Talked about rapacious taxation of the Kingdom of Naples and of Tuscany. Alright. He talked about acting impetuously, mentioned Pope Julius II acting impetuously in everything he did. And I thought that was unique. And he talked about how Julius dragged the King of France along behind him, and that, you know, he wanted to put down the Venetians. Subhanallah. How to command. And then he mentioned Fortune being a woman. It's necessary, if you wish to keep her down, to beat her and knock her about. And she will let herself be conquered by men of that nature more than those who proceed coldly. And then he mentioned, you know, Fortune, like a woman, she always befriends the young because they are less cautious, fiercer, and command her with more audacity. It's quite fascinating. He's a great writer, I must say. Gives us a lot to think about. Definitely can see why his works have lasted so long. And when you hear people mention, like, oh, that's so Machiavellian, ask them, have you read his works? If they say no, then say, then why do you use that phrase? And if they say, oh, that's so Machiavellian, say, can you explain that further? And then ask them, like, what particularly is Machiavellian? And what's your source material and citation for that assertion? Because you can't use his name just as a stand-in for spooky, conniving, like, Varys and Littlefinger of Game of Thrones type of behavior. You know, because that's not exactly what we've seen here. Reading this, you can see the soundness in what he's saying. It's not as villainesque as people are putting it. And when you see quotes of him, I've seen people use quotes, and I can see that they left out words of the quote, and they're misapplying it, and it's like out of context, and it doesn't make sense, and you're like, this is trash. So whenever you come across a quote from Niccolo Machiavelli, if it doesn't have a citation, be like, hey man, you're posting this quote. You got a citation for that, book number? You know, I would like to see the full sentencing here. And remember, he's writing in Italian, and you need to think about translation as well. And so, that's what I have to say about that. But I have enjoyed his works, and I have learned a lot from him. You know, and I don't think it's fair just to see him as a villain. I don't really get that vibe. But again, people use his name as a sort of stand-in for spooky politics. And you're like, what has he said that was really that bad? Or are not true? You know, you look at his time period, and if you look at how Italy, it's not like how Italy is today. Here's a pizza pie! Come see a Rome! You know, this was like a time when Italy had more spunk. You know? It wasn't just a tourist destination to get selfies for Instagram. You know, it's selling gelato on the street, or having gay men do Gucci and Versace commercials in the fashion capital Milan. You know, it was a very different place. And so looking at the time period that he's writing can help you to understand more of his perspective, right? The voice of that era, you know, and we put ourselves in that time period when we can see it through a different lens. Let me know what you think. I appreciate all of you for watching. If you'd like to support my work, you can do so by going to my blog, joining it, and seeing about the other things that I write, which is www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Please like, comment, and share, and I hope you found this beneficial. I really enjoy doing textual analysis. And until I see you again, bye-bye.